thank y'all so much. I really appreciate y'all having me today. And hopefully, I know all of y'all do research and are very well versed in this stuff, but hopefully I'll bring up something y'all haven't heard before. So my presentation, I'm going to start out with talking about particularly resources for doing research at the Alabama Department of Archives and History, what we've got online, which is great because it's so much easier to do Civil War research now than it was even 2 or 3 years ago with what has been digitized and put on our website. The Alabama Department of Archives and History, what do we have online? We have Civil War and Reconstruction Governor's Papers. That was a partnership with the University of Alabama. And of particular interest, especially if you're doing genealogy research, is exemptions. So the exemption files, like it's not an actual subset, but if you search for that word, you can find where people were writing to the governor of Alabama saying, you know, hey, I'm a justice of the peace, or they were getting someone else to write on their behalf and saying, you know, hey, I'm a constable and I need to be exempt from service. And so that can be really interesting if you haven't been able to find someone in, you know, service records. Then you start searching for those avenues of, okay, why didn't they serve? Why can't I find them? And that can be an answer for you. Civil War and Reconstruction newspapers, these were a lot more special before newspapers.com got as much as they have online. But they are online. They're not keyword searchable, but they are in like PDF format. So you can go through and just go page by page. So if there's something you haven't been able to get access to any other way, those are a good resource. Textual materials cover all of the periods, but for Civil War research, we have a lot of journals and letters, and we have a telegram where the governor was actually like sending messages for Sloss and someone else to go to a certain place. So we've got all sorts of types of communications and things of that nature that end up in textual materials. It's kind of a catch-all. Civil War flags. We do not have the flag for the 4th Alabama, but we do have a lot of flags in the museum side of the collections, and pictures of those with kind of some snippets about how we came to have them are on our website. One of my favorites is the Confederate Regimental History Files. These also include 2 subsets, which are the Confederate Alabama Militia and Home Guard Unit Files and the Deceased Alabama Confederate Soldiers Files. So, of course, both of these have holes in them, as all Civil War records do, but the regimental history files themselves are basically put together by the first director of the state archives, Thomas Owen, where he was writing to different people, trying to get as much information about their Civil War service as possible. So in some cases, you might find kind of like, you know, after the fact muster rolls that have been put together. You might find accounts of people's deaths, of desertions, of, you know, it can kind of just have a whole full range of reminiscences, letters that were written at the time, and, you know, sometimes a wife or whatever writing to Mr. Owen and saying, you know, hey, this is what I remember him talking about. The militia and home guard files are very disappointing, because they at best have a list of who served in a particular unit as a home guard. At worst, they have just a listing of who was the officers. The Deceased Alabama Confederate Soldiers Files, those are really great if you're trying to see who someone's next of kin was or confirm like a familial association. They are spotty. We clearly don't have all of them, because I have searched many, many times in there and not found what I was looking for, even though I was positive someone died during the war. But basically, those files are just a sheet saying, you know, he served in this regiment, he died in this battle, and then it will provide some information about who the next of kin was, maybe a bit of an address. And so it's really good for genealogy more than anything else. So this is an example of regimental history files for the 4th Alabama. There are 4 different folders and they're in 5 different sets. So there's a lot of info on the 4th. That right there was, as you can see, someone writing to Thomas Owen saying, this is in accordance with your request. And he had asked about Colonel W.A. Johnson of Roddy's 4th Alabama, and she asked if he wanted a photograph, and I have not had a chance to follow up and make sure we actually have that photograph, because it's so annoying. These letters will mention things that we don't have. It's like, hey, would you like for us to send you this? And then someone passes away or someone moves or whatever, and then we don't have it. This is an example of deceased soldiers' files. This, you see on the outside, it says the widow's name, and then on the inside it tells his name, what regiment he was with, and the circumstances of his death. We do not have deceased soldiers files for the 4th either, so that is very annoying. But this is a company, I believe, that was in North Alabama, 31st. Exemption applications and letters, those can be really interesting depending on the circumstances of how someone was trying to get out of serving. This one's pretty benign. It's just a gentleman writing on behalf of another gentleman saying that he has been duly sworn in as a justice of the peace. These are not keyword searchable or necessarily going to give you specific names, but they are kind of grouped together by county. So if you're looking for someone in a specific county, you may be able to just go through every single page and find what you need. Civil War and Reconstruction newspapers, as you can hopefully see, because that is very small, you can browse by county, or you can look for specific newspaper names in the keyword search up at the top. This is an example of what we've got online, North Alabamian from October 1865. And so you just click on view up there in that top corner, and it will let you go through the whole thing. And you can download it, save it to your computer, go back to it later. So this is an example of textual materials. This is a personal favorite because one of my other interests, one of them is Fort Morgan, because I did work there for a while after grad school. And this is the diary of the Siege of Fort Morgan. And it's very, very interesting. It's got, I went through and transcribed it just because the handwriting is a little, iffy. And I guess if you're being shot at while you're in a third system fortification, your handwriting is not going to really be your biggest worry. It's very sad on this one that he does stop writing for the last part of the siege. Very understandable, but sad, because I would have loved to have had his perspective for those last few days. But that is an example of what we have in textual materials. This is an example of the Alabama Civil War flag collection. This is a flag for the 7th Alabama Infantry, Company K, Florence Guards. And the catalog, you can't see it, I'm sure, because of the itty bitty print, but it tells you that the flag was presented to the company by the ladies of Florence through the Reverend Dr. Rivers on April 1st, 1861 at the Masonic Hall in Florence, Alabama. It was received by Captain S.A.M. Wood. No subsequent history of the flag has been located. In 1903, Dr. Owen, director of the Alabama Department of Archives and History, wrote to John B. Weekly of Birmingham requesting the donation of the flag. And he was turned down. He was told that the current owner was Turner R. Weekly, and he was unwilling to part with it for any purpose because it had been given to him by his father. Apparently, the flag eventually became the property of John B. Weekly, who donated it to the Alabama Department of Archives and History on October 7, 1913. So it not only helps preserve the flags, but it also kind of gives a backstory of sort of the trail that the object took in getting to us. And there's some really interesting stories in there. The ADAH Civil War database, this is a great place to start particularly if you have ancestors or someone you're researching for historical purposes and you haven't been able to figure out what regiment they're in. So you can type in last name in one of the boxes there. It gives you an option to put last name, first name. I think it gives middle initial, branch, regiment, company, and keyword. You really don't need most of that. Searching by last name is the best idea. Searching, if you know that there are multiple spellings, you might just want to search for the first 3 or 4 letters of their last name and then just go from there scrolling through. But that's one of the direct links that I have in that handout. Something that is very frustrating about these for me is that we don't always have the record that's cited. So we have a transcription of the record that's cited in the comments when you pull up the record database. So Sloss is actually listed on here, I think, about 3 times. And I think once he's Joseph Sloss. On this one, he's J.H. Sloss. So it can be listed, somebody can be listed for their pension. They can be listed for their service record. They can be listed if they get a medical exemption and end up going into the Home Guard before the war's over. Like there's a number of different ways, and officers are usually listed in some other records, like officers lists, essentially. So this particular listing on this one is saying that he had the rank of major and he was absent and temporary judge advocate. So this goes to some records that I actually found on Fold 3 that are talking about Roddy being so fond of him that he wanted him to be judge advocate. So this says, yes, he got that request. And it cites the location of the record being Tuscumbia, Alabama, and dated November 1st, 1864. So kind of along a similar line as the database that we have, except much broader, is the NPS Soldiers and Sailors database. So this will let you look at soldiers or sailors from across the United States, Union or Confederate, and it just gives you the barest bones info, but it is free. And if you've been having trouble finding, which John Smith is the one that you're looking for, then you can get on here potentially and, print out every John Smith you can find that might be from the state or the area, and then work. So it's a good tool for beginning research. Also a good tool for kind of beginning research, but also just general reference, is Brewer's Civil War. So this is a link that is in that handout. And Brewer's Civil War, it has entries for every single regiment. And as all of y'all probably know, the 4th Alabama, there's more than one 4th Alabama. There's Roddy's and there's Russell's, which makes newspaper research an absolute nightmare. So Brewer's Civil War gives you kind of just a little brief snippet of history. It's digitized on our website in PDF, so you can download it to your computer, keep it forever. Just probably shouldn't sell it on eBay. So it gives you that brief little snippet of history about their engagements. It's not all inclusive, but then it also gives you a list of field and staff, which is, to the best of his ability, the listing of everyone who was part of the staff. I have noticed some errors and omissions with his book, but it is overall an excellent source and a great place to start. Of the 4th, he says the regiment was organized at Tuscumbia, October 1862, and was sent to Middle Tennessee. It wintered near the army, but in the early spring was sent to the Tennessee Valley. When Dodge advanced up the valley, the 4th met him below Tuscumbia and contested the ground to Town Creek, losing severely. It took part in the pursuit of Strait, and as the heart and nucleus of Roddy's brigade, was on constant and perilous duty. The regiment fought with loss at Tishomingo and suffered severely in the Battle of Harrisburg. On Forest, Athens, and Pulaski raid, the 4th bore the brunt of 2 or 3 fights and was badly cut up. It bore the leading part in General Roddy's movements, repelling raids, picketing the front, and making a number of daring attacks, such as that at Barton's and the one at Florence. When Wilson crossed the mountains, the regiment was in his front and fought nearly all the way from Montevallo to Selma. The largest portion of the 4th was captured at Selma, and the remnant laid down its arms at Pond Spring. So it does go through the list of field and staff, and Sloss is listed on here. but it does say that he transferred. And I have no idea how many hours I spent trying to find him in another regiment. And I think the only thing I can figure that this means is that it's referring to him being kind of detached as judge advocate, part of that staff. So I'm still on the hunt to be sure that that's actually the reason. So if anybody has seen anything to that contrary on that, please do fill me in afterwards. So one of my absolute favorite things is the War of the Rebellion series that has the full official reports and also the correspondence. So the telegrams, the messages, the letters that were written back and forth during battle, after battle, planning battle. And it's so frustrating the way they can, like, you know, if you're trying to follow Roddy, he's listed in, you know, like 15 of these things. So a really great place to start. And if anybody didn't know, I believe the Florence Library has a copy of these, and I know UNA does. And
some of them are online, but I don't think all of them are. All of them are.
If you're like me, you want the physical book, but yes, you are correct. Y'all are correct. They are online. I love my books, and so I have actual copies of some of them. I don't have room for the entire War of the Rebellion series in my house, but I do have the ones for Fort Morgan, and some for Shiloh. I think I've got the Shiloh ones too. The General Index, if you don't know where you're going, is a great place to start, and might not be, like, not every library seems to have purchased the General Index. It's very strange to me. But if you find the General Index, and you can look by regiment, but it starts out like for Alabama, it's under A, and then it has the state of Alabama, and then it has every regiment listed that served from Alabama that is mentioned in here, and then it has the number. So like when you see Roddy, it's got 1. That's the series number, and then 25. Let's see. 23, 24, 30, like those are the actual book numbers, so volume numbers. So series and volume. And then you can go and play the same fun hunt with those series and volumes. So for those of y'all who might not be familiar with Fold 3, though I figure everyone in here is, we have free access at the Alabama Department of Archives and History. And it is something that we use for Civil War, War of 1812 is really the ones that are most useful for us. So when you click on the icon for Civil War Confederate, you will get an option to look for in the catalog, and then you want to select U.S. Civil War Service Records, Confederate Alabama, 1861 to 1865. So this will get rid of a lot of the noise if you just go directly to the Alabama collection. And so I search for Sloss, and I get these 4 results. So we have his brother Thomas, and then we have Joseph H. Sloss. So Fold 3 service records include Confederate service records, Union service records, Confederate amnesty records, Southern claims applications, Confederate citizens files, and Confederate casualty reports, all of which can be very helpful. And this particular record right here shows G.W. Foster, which would have been Wash Foster, in the 4th Cavalry. So service records, as far as data, they can include dates of service, names of engagements participated in, hospital records, prisoner of war records information, pay information, and location and details of death. Service index cards can include regiment and company information, rank, and alternate names or spellings of the name that soldiers went by. This is very, very important. Because no one could spell. That's how you feel after you've done this for a while. Like, seriously, it's like, how do you screw up Smith? Oh, you added an E to it. Yes. Or they leave off something that you just look at and you're like, why did you do this? Why? This was so simple. So this helps you catch when whoever the record taker was, if they spelled phonetically, this will help you see other names that someone might be filed under. Muster roll cards are part of service records, and these examples show James E. Couch. He was a private in Company B of the 3rd Alabama Infantry, and it shows the date and location and duration of his enlistment. And anytime you see where someone's been paid, it means they should have still been alive by that point. So that helps you follow them in their service. Records of illness are something that can be in the service records. This particular gentleman was sick at a naval hospital. He was down at Fort Morgan in Gaines. He was sick at Naval Hospital in January, February of 1862. His condition was such that he was discharged from the Army due to physical disability. And here is his certificate of disability, which is something I haven't seen too many of. And it goes through like his illnesses, his rank, his service, his age, his physical description. And I always love physical descriptions because so often there's either one picture of someone or no pictures of someone. So getting back to the whole, why can't you spell? These particular records are for George Jake, and his name was spelled G-A-K-E, J-A-K-E, G-E-C-K, G-E-A-I-K. And I feel like I left one off of the slide. Like it seemed like it just kept going. Like I have literally found people before that had like 6 spellings of their name. And you're just looking at it and you're like, why? Why did you make my life harder? So he is listed in the claims of deceased soldiers, and that mentions his father's name. So the deceased soldiers claims are particularly when pay is owed to a soldier when they died. That's the person, the next of kin, that's coming along and saying, hey, I need to claim the $60 that he's owed. So in this case, that was his father, which can tell you he probably wasn't married, or else it would be his wife. And that will save you from wasting time looking for a pension application. Records can include desertion. If a soldier is listed as a deserter, pay attention to subsequent records. Was he in the hospital and not truly missing? Does he return, potentially indicating a visit home and not permanent desertion? If you find no further records after a note of desertion, it's probably likely that the soldier actually deserted. But quite often you'll see a listing of deserted and then you'll see them back in the regiment. So particularly when a regiment was close to home, they might have just kind of went home for a few days and not actually deserted. Tips for finding service records: know what county they were from before you start searching. You can use census records to determine this. So it will help you narrow down once you start searching, when you have the place of enlistment, which is not always where they are from, but it should be relatively close geographically. Consider checking pension records before you search service records or to clarify your service records search. If available, pension records can help determine which James Smith in the records is yours by helping you match county, wife's name, and regiment. And remember to search for alternate spellings of names. An example: John B. Haynes, Jonathan B. Haynes, J. Haynes, J.B. Haynes, J-H-A-I-N-E-S, J-H-A-Y-N-E-S, etc. These spellings will not necessarily be the same on each record or type of record, and that does not mean that that's not the same person that you're looking for. Start with a few search terms and work your way up to adding additional terms. I have found repeatedly that too many terms can make the system rule out good matches because it's trying to find everything that you're putting on there, and if someone messed up a transcription or left something out of the records that you're putting in your search, then it can cause issues. Remember to look at dates of service on records. Soldiers often served in 2 or more regiments due to re-enlistment, transfers, and consolidation of units. And there was one man in particular that I did some research on who he had actually got in service, got out with a medical exemption, and then he re-enlisted for the bounty later on. So he's listed. You would think that should have been it for him, but he actually goes back just so he can get the bounty. So you never know. It's worth checking all the avenues. Ancestry.com has muster rolls, pension applications, census or enumeration of Confederate soldiers residing in Alabama in 1907 and 1921, and service records, typically linked with Fold 3. And so if you don't have a Fold 3 subscription and you're trying to look at them on Ancestry, it's just going to kind of give you the runaround. Alabama U.S. Civil War muster rolls, 1861 to 1865, is a collection that you can find doing a catalog search on Ancestry. If you go up and do a card catalog up there in the left-hand corner, you can look for specific collections that don't necessarily come up if you're just looking at Alabama, and this is one of them. So this gives you an example of what they look like. Sometimes it's just a top list. Sometimes it's the actual muster roll from the time period. And that was the one for Couch. For pensions, the collection on Ancestry of Alabama, Texas, and Virginia U.S. Confederate pensions is the best one. There's also Alabama U.S. Confederate pension and service records, 1862 to 1947. Those are really more just index cards saying that someone was paid, or it might even list that someone had passed away, so they were falling off the record. But it does, at least if you can't find somebody in the first collection, you might be able to find someone in the second collection. So pension applications, here's an example of one, and it gives the rank and the regiment, and this gentleman served in the Georgia Cavalry, so it gives you that information. And it says he is now afflicted with lung trouble and epilepsy. So pension applications were particularly for indigent people who couldn't work, who needed some assistance with being able to provide for themselves and their families. And they had to list why they should be given a pension in pension applications. Reiterates that he contracted epilepsy and afterward an abscess of the lungs while he was at Camp Harrelson in 1862. For genealogy purposes in particular, the inventory forms in these applications are very helpful, very interesting. It provides a listing of everything that they did own that was of value, and further justifies the fact that they very much need a pension to be able to subsist. Widows' pension records, we do have some of these in ADAH's digital collections for widows' pension records, but it's very strange, like what we do have as opposed to what's on Ancestry. But it's also another place you should look if you haven't been able to find someone. Ancestry has the 1907 Confederate Census, and if you are having trouble finding someone, this can help you figure out what regiment somebody was in, or maybe further explain that they were in 2 or 3 different regiments. So it can provide some clarification. But what you really wish is that everyone lived until 1921, which unfortunately for them and my research, they did not. The 1921 Confederate Census, as you can see just off the bat, is much more detailed. It gives a place to list not only their service in the battles that they were in, their age, where they were born, where they're living now, but also the names of all their children. So if you're trying to do genealogy research, having the names of children, wife's name, all of that is just absolute gold. But so many people didn't live until 1921. So if you are having trouble finding someone in records, something to remember is the conscription age. So the first Conscription Act was passed on April 16th, 1862, and made any white male between 18 and 35 years old liable to 3 years of military service. On September 27, 1862, the second Conscription Act extended the age limit to 45 years. The third Conscription Act was passed February 17, 1864, and changed this to 17 to 50 years old for service of an unlimited period. And if someone wasn't subject to one of these acts, your ancestor may have served in the Home Guard if they served at all. So if you're having trouble finding someone, understanding, and also having trouble understanding why they just suddenly enlist at this really random time during the war, this can kind of explain it. So, Militia Home Guard, why would you find someone there? So men older than the maximum draft age often served in the Home Guard if they served at all. And it could also include men wounded in battle, maybe they contracted disease while they're out there in the field, and they're discharged from the regular Army. Also, if someone had tried to enlist and they were in poor health and they weren't fit to serve, they might be in the Home Guard. And in some cases, boys too young to be drafted into the regular Army are included. So these are some examples of the Home Guard records that we have. They're on microfilm, but they're also in our digital collections. That first one is just telling you who has been elected officers for this particular company. The second one gives you, I think, pretty much the same thing. This is for the Greensboro Light Artillery Guards. And it just says that Captain Jones was paid from January to February 1861 and stationed at Fort Morgan. So they leave a lot to be desired. You either get the barest minimum info or else you just get a list of who served. And I have seen these not have people listed that should have been. So this is another example of Home Guard records. This letter is stating who had been commissioned as officers from the Guards of Greene County. It was signed by Alabama Governor A.B. Moore in 1861. And sometimes letters similar to this are all that is filed for a Home Guard unit. Muster rolls are not available for many Home Guard units. If you can't find someone on the Confederate side, you might find them in Union service records. The 1st Alabama Cavalry is listed under on Fold 3 as Civil War Service Records, Union, Alabama. And those they basically look like the same thing as the Confederate records. They have the same kinds of information. 1st Alabama included men from Alabama as well as Mississippi and Georgia. And records can include service records, volunteer enlistment forms, muster rolls, and descriptive rolls. So soldiers from Alabama could have ended up in other Union regiments as well, but this is the best place to begin searching. One of the other wonderful things that is on our website are maps. Anytime you're doing Civil War research, I'm sure everyone in here pretty much loves maps, just about as much as I do. Finding a good map can sometimes be a challenge because there are many, many, many maps of the Battle of Mobile Bay that have been drawn after the fact that are so terrible, are absolutely skewed out of proportion. This one is great. This one comes from the American Battlefield Trust, which is a great source for maps of the various battles and wars that America has been involved in. But also on our website is the ADAH's digitized maps collection. So that includes Civil War maps, ones that were sketched by hand in some cases. We have one in our collection that was sketched by one of Roddy's scouts, I believe it was, and shows Florence and the river and everything. So definitely check those out. Newspapers.com is one of the best things on the face of the planet, unless you're trying to find specific regiment numbers, and there are many that are called that, like the 4th. You can search using names, keywords, state, county name, city name, and specific dates or date ranges. Date ranges can be more helpful than using specific dates. Using county or even state searches can sometimes yield better results than city searches. And once again, remember the multiple spellings thing, because I had to sit down and when I was researching Sloss and write down a list of every single way his name had been spelled on anything I had seen, including initials, middle name, first name, variations, the whole thing, and just check them off one at a time.